most people carry a stable assumption about money. Effort is expected to translate into security. Adaptation is expected to be rewarded, and the system is expected to remain manageable even under strain. This assumption is rarely stated directly, but it guides behavior. It shapes how risk is interpreted, how authority is trusted, and how discomfort is tolerated. It supports the belief that the future, while uncertain, remains controllable. That belief has been weakening, and in 2026, it will be harder for many people to sustain. Current financial stress is often described as temporary. Rising costs are treated as a phase, wage stagnation is framed as cyclical, and debt is presented as a tool rather than an exposure. These explanations reduce anxiety because they preserve the idea that the system still functions as expected. They encourage minor adjustments instead of structural recognition. This response is not unusual. People are inclined to protect continuity when disruption threatens basic security. Shifts in perception carry psychological cost, so the mind resists them. Social reinforcement strengthens that resistance. Institutions, media, and cultural narratives emphasize stability, incremental improvement, personal responsibility, and resilience. These messages are not necessarily inaccurate, but they are incomplete. They focus attention on individual behavior and away from structural conditions. This framing encourages people to interpret financial difficulty as a personal shortcoming rather than a predictable outcome of broader forces. The result is often private self-blame rather than clear understanding. Money becomes harder, not because people lose the ability to work, but because the conditions that govern access and circulation tighten. Access becomes more conditional. Costs rise faster than most adjustments can offset, and systems that once absorbed pressure increasingly transfer it downward. The shift can begin as inconvenience, then become persistent stress, and finally become constraint. By the time it is widely recognized, behavior has often already adapted to it. The biological response to financial threat resembles the response to social threat. Attention narrows, short-term choices feel safer than long-term planning, and the nervous system prioritizes immediate relief over strategic positioning. Under pressure, people accept worse terms, higher risk, and greater dependency in exchange for short-term stability. These decisions can appear voluntary, but they are shaped by constraint. Pressure alters judgment without announcing itself. Debt is central to this shift. It can provide access while reducing autonomy. It can enable consumption without ownership and progress without security. In the short term, it can feel like a solution. Over time, it becomes an obligation that limits movement. As debt increases across households, flexibility declines. The ability to refuse unfavorable conditions weakens. Systems tend to benefit when participants cannot exit easily. Inflation compounds the effect by eroding purchasing power without visible enforcement. The same income produces less stability, savings lose function, and long-term planning becomes more fragile. People who rely primarily on wages tend to feel this first, but the effects spread broadly. Inflation does not target recklessness with precision. It applies across the economy, while favoring those positioned closer to asset ownership and price control. A common response to inflation is to work more. More hours, more effort, and additional income streams can seem like rational solutions because effort has historically been rewarded. In tighter systems, effort alone often does not restore balance. It can increase exhaustion without improving position. The underlying issue is not productivity, it is leverage. Without leverage, effort becomes a method of filling gaps created by others. Leverage is unevenly distributed. Those who control assets, pricing, or access can shift costs outward. Those who rely on income tend to absorb costs inward. As pressure increases, this asymmetry becomes more pronounced. The rules do not need to change publicly for the effect to be real. They can be adjusted through fees, thresholds, requirements, and administrative friction. Each change can look minor in isolation. In combination, they reshape behavior. Technology strengthens these dynamics. Automation and optimization reduce the value of routine labor while increasing the value of control systems. Jobs often do not disappear overnight. They erode. Wages stagnate while expectations rise, monitoring expands under the language of efficiency, and performance becomes more measurable and less negotiable. Many workers adapt in order to remain relevant. In many cases, adaptation delays displacement rather than preventing it. The promise of flexibility is frequently used to frame this environment as opportunity. Gig structures, contract work, and platform-mediated labor can offer autonomy in theory. In practice, they often move risk from institutions to individuals. Income becomes more variable, benefits decline, and stability is replaced by continuous adjustment. Some people benefit from this arrangement. Many absorb volatility without adequate compensation. Flexibility can become another term for exposure. Housing illustrates the pattern. Ownership becomes less accessible, while rent consumes a larger share of income. Mobility decreases even as stability weakens. People pay more while holding less control. This affects decision-making across daily life. Career risk becomes harder to tolerate when housing is insecure. Entrepreneurship becomes harder to justify when basic shelter depends on uninterrupted income. Compliance increases through dependency rather than force. Education follows a similar trajectory. Credentials become more expensive and less differentiating. The promise of upward mobility through education weakens, while the cost remains. Debt replaces opportunity for many. People invest years and resources for diminishing returns, relying on an older equation that no longer holds consistently. By 2026, the gap between expectation and outcome will be harder to dismiss. Financial stress is often framed as a personal management problem. Budgeting advice expands, and discipline is treated as the primary solution. These tools are useful when systems are stable. In less stable conditions, they offer limited protection. They encourage people to optimize within constraints they did not choose. This approach can preserve order by directing frustration inward, rather than toward structural causes. Power operates through normalization. When difficulty becomes common, it becomes less visible. People compare their position to peers who are also under strain and conclude the issue is personal. This reduces collective recognition. Systems benefit when pressure is distributed across many individuals rather than concentrated where decisions originate. By 2026, the gap between perception and conditions is likely to widen. Many will continue to behave as if prior rules still apply, adjusting habits while ignoring structural shifts. Others will sense the change but struggle to describe it. Anxiety increases without clear attribution. That anxiety is often redirected into cultural conflict or personal despair. Both responses are predictable, and neither changes the underlying mechanics. Money becomes harder not because resources disappear, but because access becomes gated. Requirements increase, margins narrow, mistakes become more expensive, and recovery takes longer. This environment rewards those with buffers and penalizes those without them. The effect compounds over time. Early disadvantage tends to magnify later vulnerability. The psychological impact is measurable. People can become more risk-averse in ways that limit growth, while becoming more risk-tolerant in ways that increase exposure. Strategic risk is avoided, while structural risk is accepted as normal. People hesitate to invest in leverage, but accept dependency because it feels unavoidable. This inversion benefits those who design and control the terms. Emotional reactions intensify under financial pressure. Fear drives short-term thinking. Anger searches for targets, and hope clings to narratives that promise restoration. These reactions do not change how the system functions. The system does not respond to emotion. It responds to position. Position is largely determined by proximity to control. Control of assets, control of information, and control of access. Those far from control experience money as scarce and unpredictable. Those closer to control experience it as fluid and manageable. This divide is structural rather than moral. By 2026, more people are likely to notice that working harder does not reliably produce proportional security. The mismatch between effort and outcome becomes clearer. Many will internalize this as failure. Others will externalize it without clear analysis. A smaller group will adapt strategically through observation rather than reaction. Strategic awareness begins with acknowledging that systems do not reward fairness consistently. They reward alignment with incentives, leverage, and conditions. This recognition is uncomfortable because it removes the comfort of moral framing and replaces it with mechanics. Money tends to flow toward positions that reduce friction and increase control. It tends to avoid positions that require constant effort simply to maintain stability. By 2026, friction is likely to increase for many participants. Fees expand, delays lengthen, and requirements tighten. Each layer extracts time and attention as well as money. Over time, these costs become cumulative. Attention becomes a critical resource. Financial stress consumes cognitive bandwidth. Decisions degrade and opportunities are missed, not because they do not exist, but because they are harder to evaluate under pressure. Those with buffers can plan long-term. Those without buffers are pushed into reactive decision-making. This difference compounds advantage. Institutions recognize these patterns. Many products are designed to exploit urgency. Terms are structured to appear manageable in the short term while extracting value over time. Language emphasizes accessibility and inclusion while obscuring cost. People accept these terms because alternatives can feel worse. Consent under constraint remains consent, but the environment shapes what feels available. By the time hardship is acknowledged publicly, behavior has often adjusted. Precarity becomes normalized. Instability becomes framed as adulthood. Expectations lower gradually. Ambition narrows. Survival replaces growth as the primary objective. This shift is substantial, but it rarely presents as a single event. The most important change is not the lack of money. It is the loss of optionality. When choices narrow, power shifts outward. People become easier to manage and direct because their ability to refuse declines. This does not require a coordinated plan. It follows from systems that prioritize efficiency, where efficiency can conflict with human autonomy. Those who retain autonomy tend to do so by positioning themselves where dependency is minimized. This requires early recognition and deliberate positioning. Many will not do this in time, not because they are incapable, but because familiar assumptions delay recognition. Trust in established structures can feel safer than confronting change. By 2026, money is likely to feel heavier. Decisions carry more weight, errors persist longer, and recovery requires more time. This environment does not reward panic or denial. It rewards clarity. Clarity does not provide comfort. It provides orientation. It makes it easier to identify where pressure originates and how it moves. It reduces emotional reaction and replaces it with assessment. This shift is internal and does not require permission. The future does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates. By the time it is described plainly, it has already shaped behavior. Money will be harder for many people in 2026 because the systems that distribute it are tightening, and instincts that once protected individuals are less effective in this environment. What follows after recognition is not immediate action, but recalibration. When financial pressure becomes persistent rather than episodic, behavior begins to change at a deeper level. People stop planning around improvement and begin planning around avoidance. They choose paths that minimize loss rather than maximize gain. This shift is subtle. It does not feel like surrender. It feels like caution. Over time, caution becomes habit. This behavioral shift has broad consequences. Markets adjust not only to supply and demand, but to sentiment and expectation. When large segments of the population anticipate difficulty, spending contracts in uneven ways. Essential costs continue to rise, while discretionary movement becomes restrained. This creates pockets of growth alongside widespread stagnation. The contrast intensifies perception of inequality without necessarily changing underlying structures. At the individual level, financial decision-making becomes more conservative in visible areas and more desperate in invisible ones. People delay life decisions that require stability, while taking on hidden risk to maintain surface continuity. They postpone relocation, family planning, and career changes, while relying more heavily on credit, short-term agreements, and informal arrangements. Stability becomes performative rather than real. This environment favors institutions and actors who can tolerate longer timelines. When pressure forces individuals to think in weeks or months, those operating on years or decades gain advantage. They can wait for better terms. They can absorb temporary inefficiency. They can acquire assets from those who need liquidity quickly. Time itself becomes a form of leverage. By 2026, this temporal imbalance becomes more visible. Those with access to time experience money as a strategic tool. Those without experience it as a constraint. The difference is not intelligence or effort. It is exposure to urgency. Urgency narrows choice. It accelerates decision-making without improving accuracy. The cultural response to this condition often misidentifies the problem. Public discourse tends to frame financial difficulty as a moral issue, emphasizing responsibility, discipline, or motivation. These narratives simplify complex dynamics into individual virtues or failures. They offer explanation without resolution. They preserve the idea that outcomes are primarily personal rather than positional. This framing benefits systems under strain. When individuals internalize structural pressure as personal inadequacy, resistance dissolves into self-correction. People work harder, accept worse terms, and blame themselves when results do not improve. This maintains order without overt enforcement. Compliance is achieved through normalization. Over time, this produces emotional fatigue rather than revolt. People do not necessarily become angry. They become quiet. Expectations lower. Ambition becomes narrower. Risk tolerance shifts in ways that reinforce the system. The desire for security outweighs the desire for advancement. This is not a failure of character. It is an adaptation to constraint. The difficulty is that adaptation does not restore equilibrium. It stabilizes imbalance. When large populations adapt downward, systems adjust upward. Costs continue to rise because resistance is muted. Access continues to tighten because alternatives disappear. Each cycle reinforces the next. This is why money becomes harder without dramatic collapse. There is no single point of failure. There is accumulation. Small frictions add up. Margins erode. Recovery windows shorten. Mistakes compound. None of this requires malicious intent. It emerges from incentive alignment. At this stage, emotional reactions become less useful. Anxiety does not reveal leverage. Anger does not alter terms. Hope does not change structure. These responses may feel necessary, but they do not produce movement. The system responds to position, not feeling. Position in this context is defined by optionality, the ability to say no, the ability to wait, the ability to absorb short-term loss without cascading failure. As optionality declines, negotiation power declines with it. Choices become constrained before they are consciously recognized as such. Many people sense this narrowing without naming it. They describe feeling stuck, stretched, or permanently behind. They notice that effort no longer produces margin. They feel that recovery takes longer than decline. These perceptions are accurate. They reflect a system that has shifted its burden distribution. By 2026, this sense of compression becomes widespread enough to shape behavior collectively. People move less. They change jobs less. They invest less in uncertain outcomes. Mobility decreases while volatility increases. This combination produces stagnation with stress, a condition that erodes long-term resilience. Institutions adjust to this environment by prioritizing predictability. Credit models tighten. Risk thresholds lower. Eligibility requirements expand. Each adjustment is justified internally as prudence. Externally, it feels like exclusion. The gap between qualification and access widens. This gap reinforces dependency. When access is scarce, people tolerate more to maintain it. They accept unfavorable conditions to avoid losing position. This applies to employment, housing, credit, and even social systems. Stability becomes something to protect rather than something to build upon. In this environment, financial literacy alone is insufficient. Understanding tools does not change leverage. Budgeting skill does not restore optionality when margins are thin. These skills matter, but they operate within constraint. Without structural awareness, they risk becoming maintenance strategies rather than positioning strategies. Strategic awareness does not mean rejecting participation. It means recognizing where pressure originates and how it is transmitted. It means understanding that systems respond to incentives, not appeals. It means separating emotional response from analytical assessment. This shift is internal. It does not require confrontation or withdrawal. It requires observation. Patterns repeat when conditions persist. Once patterns are visible, surprise diminishes. Reduced surprise reduces reactivity. Reduced reactivity preserves bandwidth. Bandwidth matters. Financial pressure consumes attention. It fragments focus. It narrows thinking. Preserving attention becomes a form of resistance. Those who can maintain cognitive space under pressure gain advantage, even if their material position has not yet improved. By extending timelines internally, individuals can make decisions that are less reactive. This does not eliminate constraint, but it prevents self-amplification. The system extracts value most efficiently from urgency. Slowing response disrupts that extraction. None of this guarantees financial improvement. It does not promise relief. It does not restore previous conditions. It does, however, prevent unnecessary loss. It allows individuals to avoid the most damaging forms of adaptation, the ones that trade long-term position for short-term relief. As 2026 approaches, the dominant divide is not between those who have money and those who do not. It is between those who understand the environment and those who still interpret pressure as personal anomaly. The first group adjusts posture. The second group expends energy trying to restore a past arrangement. Money will be harder because the system no longer absorbs error the way it once did. It transfers error downward. It penalizes delay. It rewards proximity to control. These dynamics are already present. They intensify rather than reverse. The final shift is psychological. When people stop expecting relief, they stop reacting to every fluctuation. Emotional volatility decreases. Decisions become quieter, not easier, but steadier. This steadiness does not come from hope. It comes from recognition. The environment continues regardless of reaction. Systems move according to incentive and structure. Individuals can only choose how clearly they see it. Clarity does not remove pressure. It removes confusion. What remains is stillness, not passivity, but composure. The understanding that money difficulty is not a temporary malfunction for most people, but a structural condition. Seeing it clearly does not solve it. It prevents being shaped by it unconsciously. That is the difference.